Good afternoon. In Tliwi Zestaran, Chwabanaki, Beskamogadi Nil, Nudebig Zibayig, Wigo Banawabskewi. My name is Esther Ann. I am Wabanaki. I'm Passamaquoddy and I'm from Zibayig, Pleasant Point, and I live here with Penobscot people. And I work for the Capacity Building Center for Tribes at the Muskie School at the University of Southern Maine. I'm very happy to be here, excited for this webinar, and so delighted that we have so many participants logging on. I'm really excited to introduce you to Kendra Loudon Potawatomi, who was gracious enough last summer to let us record her going through her tribal home study guide. And we added that to the Tools from Tribes section of our Tribal Information Exchange website. And so she's so gracious and to give us another chance to share skills around building skills around home studies and building your capacity to conduct home studies, whether you're just starting or really experienced. I think everyone will get something out of this. Before I turn it over to Kendra, I just wanted us to kind of arrive and just ask everyone to take a stretch like this and a breath. And I'd like to just have a few moments of silence. Today is September 30th. It's also known as Orange Shirt Day. I have my orange shirt on, and it's not just about putting a shirt on, it's about really keeping in our minds and our prayers and our intentions the memory of the children who didn't survive Indian residential schools, Indian boarding schools, and to the ones that did as well. So I just want us to just take a minute to arrive and center those children in our hearts and minds before we get started. Thank you. Well, everyone, thank you. I know Kendra has a lot to share, so I don't want to take up too much time. So I'll hand it over to her. Thank you.
Bojo, Kendra Loudon and Desnikas, Jigwe Owen Dodum, Sexy Owen Dodum, St. Louis, Oklahoma, Nedochbia, Shawnee, Oklahoma, Indada, Bodawabni, Kwayandao, Wajashi, Kwayandao. Hello, my name is Kendra Loudon and I am Potawatomi. I'm also of Osage descent as well. I live in Shawnee, Oklahoma in the Citizen Potawatomi Nation Reservation in Oklahoma Indian Territory. I'm originally from south of here in the same county in a little town called St. Louis, Oklahoma, not Missouri. And I am really excited to be here today. So just to give you a little bit of my background in home studies and really in child welfare. After college, I worked for a couple of years in a tribal domestic violence and sexual assault program. And then I just felt this calling. I learned a lot about foster care, and I just wanted to work with foster parents and work with children, Indian children in foster care. So I was lucky enough to be hired on in the Indian Child Welfare Program at the Chickasaw Nation located in Ada, Oklahoma. If you're familiar with the McGirt case, which has reestablished some of our reservations, they are one of the 5 tribes that has been most directly impacted by that case decision with their own case. So that was such a great experience to work there. During that time, I was a foster care adoption worker, and so I worked tribal custody and state custody and out of state custody cases for children who were in permanent care. Some of those children were adopted quickly, others were in long-term care. And in addition to that, I also did recruitment and home studies. So I was, again, lucky enough to be able to move in a management role there for several years as the foster care manager. I also helped supervise adoption at times when needed. And then about 7 years into that, my tribe called me and said that they needed some help. So I've been at the Citizen Potawatomi Nation for about 2.5 years. So the 9 years I've been in Indian child welfare, I've actually written home studies. And one thing I wish I could tell you how many I've written. I have not kept track, but I would recommend for those of you just starting out, if you haven't kept track, it's just kind of interesting data to have. And so writing home studies is something that is a really important part of the work of a foster care worker. And I started this training really just as a way to help other tribes. I kind of, I guess, we all have our niche areas that we really enjoy in our job, and home study interviewing and writing home studies is something that I have enjoyed for a long time. So I've trained a lot of tribes in Oklahoma, and I'm really excited today, looking at the registration list, we have people from everywhere. So all across the nation, continental United States into Alaska, and I'm just very excited to see the amount of people here today. So right now, like I said, I am a foster care adoption manager at my tribe, and I also was recently elected to president of the Oklahoma Indian Child Welfare Association. So that's been a big blessing for me. And then I've been lucky enough to do a little bit of consulting work. And so that's kind of here under that guise today. But of course, as we all do in our field, everything kind of meshes together. So we'll move on to the next slide, and I'm going to talk about our objectives for this training today. So first, we want to define a home study. That's going to be a really integral piece to this. There may be some people here that aren't as familiar, and that's just fine. This training is going to really cover the gamut from those who are minimally experienced to those who maybe have a lot more. We're also going to talk about the purpose of a home study. We'll discuss the cultural dynamics in this process, working with families from different backgrounds, even different ethnicities. Often we're not just working with our Indian families, we're working with families from other cultures. We kind of need to delve into that and look and talk about how do we handle some things that pop up. And then one thing we're really going to focus a lot on in this training is interviewing methods. And so we have some mock home study interviewing. So it is through Zoom, which obviously we wouldn't normally, we're going to be in person. But I think it, although it's a different method, it does kind of show and describe some of the things that home study writers and foster care workers do deal with whenever they're completing this process. And then finally, we are going to talk about different home study assessment categories. So while we could probably spend, an hour or two just talking about references or just talking about background checks, the purpose of this training was basics and beyond. So, if you have specific questions about anything, maybe we're not going a lot into, this is such a great time to ask those questions. Like they mentioned, you can put those in the Q&A. You can raise your hand if you'd like to go on mic. And we are more than welcome any questions throughout the training. You don't have to wait until the end. So to gauge your experience and knowledge in home studies, we do have a poll. And so if you can please take a moment to answer this question: how experienced are you in the home study process? So you're very experienced and can expertly train others. Maybe some of you are experienced and confident. Others could benefit from more information. And we may have some who have never completed a home study. So we'll give you a little bit of time for everyone to answer that. And I apologize if you hear my dog crying. He's not used to being in his crate and he's not very happy about it right now. All right, we're seeing a lot of different responses here. All right, so as we can see from the poll, we have several that feel very experienced in their home study skills, and that is so awesome. I would love if you have any feedback or advice to share. We'd love to hear that. We have about 17% who are experienced in home studies and confident. We also have a equal portion of those who have some experience and some of those who have never completed home study. So this should be really interesting to kind of see what your questions and comments are today. And then, all right, go to the next slide. So first I want to talk about what is a home study. Now, some places may call it a home assessment. There may be different titles that your agency, tribe, or state uses, and that's okay. for the purposes of this, I'm just going to call it a home study. It's a pretty common term. So what a home study is a written assessment, not a biography, of prospective foster and adoptive families. And so it's evaluating if they are suitable and capable of taking care of these children. Depending on how you're licensing them, it'll be temporarily or permanently. So you may be working with a home who's foster only. You may be approving a home for adoption. Again, when I say it's not a biography, if you were to ask a lot of people, how would you describe a home study? What they might say is, well, it's a biography of my family. And that's just not the case. You're assessing them. So you're taking that information, but a biography is just a statement provided and that's it. A home study is actually giving a recommendation and assessing all of that information for capability. It does contain the story of a family. So it's going to definitely, you want to have information in there that can kind of show who they are as a person, how their past has impacted their future. And it also is going to have to meet tribal, state, and or federal requirements depending on where you work and the purpose of that home study. So at my tribe, our child welfare policy has certain standards for approving a foster adoptive home, and our tribal law or our tribal code also has certain policies. So if you maybe you're new to working for a tribe, maybe you're trying to get a foster care program going, I definitely recommend that you look at your tribal code to see what does your law say that a foster adoptive family, what are the things and requirements they have to meet in order to be approved and suitable. Because often when you get down to an adoption, the judge is going to be looking at that home study document that you turn in, and they may be comparing it to see, does this family meet the standards of tribal law? And also it provides an opportunity to educate the family about foster care and adoption. So this is really your chance. You're going to be in the home typically several times. We're going to talk about who to interview here in a moment. But you're going to be talking to a lot of people within this family, and this is your chance to answer questions and get to know them better. It also develops the worker and foster adoptive parent relationship. So not only are you getting to know them better, you're really working on your relationship. So whenever I'm in a foster home, my first visit, we have to go through a lot of information, but I make sure that I have planned my personal life around being able to stay a little bit longer in case we're really connecting. If they have a lot of questions and all of that, I just want to make sure that they feel as if, I'm not in a hurry. I'm not just trying to get answers and move on, right? My job and my role as a foster care worker is to make sure that they feel welcome to answer questions or to ask questions, and that they feel like they have a supportive person involved in this process. You have to remember, as a foster care worker or as a home study writer, sometimes you are the person that is going to stay with them and the only person until they actually get placement of a child. So building that trustful relationship is really vital. So our next slide, we are going to discuss who to interview. So how your tribe or agency does home studies, again, depends on your policy. If you do not have policy, then you might just want to think about maybe writing a procedure of how you are going to handle, interviewing and what content that has within your home study. So I'll just kind of explain an example of how I do things that works pretty good for my agency. It worked pretty good when I was at Chickasaw Nation as well, is I typically conduct 3 interviews. And so the first time that I am in a home, what I normally do is kind of like I do their home safety check. And then I talk a lot about their, why they would like to be a foster home, and kind of go over things that aren't as in depth as far as like childhood and medical and things like that. And so in my first interview, if it's a married couple or a couple that's in a long-term relationship, I'll talk with them together. But you also want to make sure that when you're doing interviews with a married couple or a couple in a relationship, that you are speaking with them individually during their portion. You're going to be asking them about their own childhood, their own relationship history, medical, jobs, all of that. And kind of how I work is they get to read what everyone said, even if they're not in the room, but just having that one-on-one environment can make people feel more comfortable. And when you have those people in a relationship where one talks for the other, that can be a little complicated. and you kind of have to deal with that. So I definitely recommend making sure that you have time to talk individually to each person you interview. You also want to talk to the minor children in the home. This is really important. They need to kind of understand the process. And, for a lot of the kids, they may just be really excited. Oh, I'm going to have a brother or sister. Well, it's a lot more complicated that as a foster parent. And so you want to spend time talking with them. And I always just make sure to say, is it okay if I speak privately and shut the door? I kind of give them an overview about the questions I'm going to ask to the parent. I'll let them know, just, I would want to know if someone interviewed a child in my home. And I'll go to the child's room. That way we can play a game. They can show me their toys. They usually are, kids like to get some attention on them. So I haven't had a lot of issues with kids wanting to talk to me, but of course that happens at times. And sometimes families may have adult children that live in the home, and you need to talk with them too. Obviously, you're going to have to background check them and do all of those things within your policy to vet them to be appropriate in the home. But you need to have those interviews to make sure they understand their rules, and they understand, or the rules of the agency, and that they are supportive of this. And what is their plan? Are they going to be helping provide babysitting? Are they going to be there? Like what does that look like? Who do they bring around? Do they have a partner that they're in a relationship with that visits? So you just can't be detailed enough really when it comes to that. And then at other times there may be a family friend that lives in the home. I've had foster homes that had a roommate before, younger couples, things like that. And so you want to talk with them as well. And again, I talked about, when I interview children, I go into their room and shut the door. You also want to, when you're doing your individual interviews, sometimes if the home is really small, and I try to vet that in my first visit, and I let them know too before I come out, hey, if you don't mind it, could you maybe, go to the porch, or if you have some errands you'd like to run, we're going to meet for about an hour and a half. And some people have a bigger home, they can go upstairs, that's fine. But you want to ensure that privacy, particularly if they are going to tell you something that is maybe they wouldn't reveal otherwise. This has happened in my past with children, that to their parents, they seem happy, and they want to be a part of this. But I had an employee that talked individually with a child, and she started telling us her concerns about her mother's care for her in her relationship with her mother. And we were kind of able to, from there, it just spiraled. And we're able to complete a behavioral health reference and kind of confirm things. And we actually ended up denying that home. And I don't know that we would have gotten to that denial as quickly, or maybe even at all, if the information that child had shared hadn't been revealed. So having that privacy is really vital to have a good home study and to also have a good home approved. Also make sure you're in a comfortable space. And now anyone that's been to a home visit, how many times have you sat on a couch and you basically fell on the floor because there's like no springs? So, you want to make sure that the family's comfortable in the setting, but also that you're comfortable, because you're going to be sitting there for a long time. So if you feel like, sitting at the table is a little bit easier for you with your paperwork, you might just recommend that. Just kind of look around and, just kind of focus on that, and it'll definitely make it a lot better for you if you're more comfortable. Another tip I have is at your first visit, schedule your next visit before you leave. It can be really hard to connect with people. So make sure you have your calendar with you if you use a paper calendar, or have your phone out to look at your digital calendar. That can really help just keep this going. If you go back to your office like, oh, I'll get back to you, and then you guys play phone tag or someone doesn't respond, it's just really going to lengthen the time it takes to get this home approved. Before we go to the next slide, did we have any questions?
No, we're watching the Q&A and the chat, so
Okay, great.
we'll let you know.
Again, please, if you have any comments, or if you have a suggestion of something you've experienced based on this, for those of you who have completed home studies, I would absolutely love to hear that. So please take a moment to share. And now we're going to talk about cultural considerations. Tribes all have unique cultures. It doesn't matter if they are, like there's multiple Potawatomi tribes. I'm a part of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. Our, specific way of living is a lot different than maybe the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi. And so you have to definitely remember, especially if you're not a part of that community, that, the tribes are going to have unique ways that they live. And each family also experiences tribal culture in their own way. There are families who are very connected to their tribal culture or to Native American culture in general. And you may be working with families who you're probably their best bet to kind of teach them. I know with Oklahoma is a little bit unique in the way that, tribes were removed here. We have nearly 40 tribes, and we have a lot of people who are very intermixed in marriage, tribal and non-tribal. And so, based off of the things that have happened in the past, from boarding schools to pre-ICWA and also ICWA not being followed, we see a lot of culture not being shared along, at least in my tribe. And so I definitely, keep in mind that they may not participate in ceremony like I do. And just remember that as you're working with them, they may need your help to guide them. You should also be able to pick up on nonverbal cues. Depending on your tribe and the location you're in, there may be certain ways of communication that are more common within that community. Also, humor may be used by the applicant to talk about difficulties or cover up their pain. I know that's probably that's one of my traits is instead of just hitting a trauma or a difficulty head on, I try to laugh and joke about it. So keep in mind that it's not necessarily that, they're not taking that seriously, but it's just a cultural thing. There also is a distrust in workers at times. I think we all know that there are families who have distrust in state workers, state child protection workers, but also there are some that haven't had a great experience with the tribe, maybe someone in their family, or maybe they had something happen in the past. And sometimes that distrust is very justified, to be honest with you. Other times it's more of a fear of what they've heard or what they've experienced in the past. And so when you're working with a family, you really need to consider that and know that, it's just one of those things that you're going to have to work through. They also may be very protective of their family and their story. They may not really want to share a lot about their family trauma or their past when you ask about it. And, that's obviously justifiable. But we have to really know what's going on in this family to make sure that, they have the coping skills and they have, a safety net in place to make sure that children won't be hurt in their home. We'll go to the next slide. And I did want to share all of the pictures in the slideshow. Most of them are from my family ceremonial grounds. We actually call it the hill because it's on a hill. And so that's my grandma laughing and my uncle Alvy. So I just wanted to share that too, just to kind of give it a little bit of flavor. So as far as what are you going to see in a home study? What does it look like? So there's a lot of different categories. So these are just some of them. These probably cover the most common, but we talk about motivation. So I ask a family, like, why have you applied to be a foster adoptive parent? What motivates you to do that? What skills do you have to care for abused and neglected children? Their childhood, their relationships, whether it be intimate partner or with their family, their beliefs on discipline. And then we even talk about their culture, and so their connection to that. What are their preferences for placement? This is a really important one to make sure that you understand and they understand the reality of what their preferences are. Ideally, you've already had a conversation with those families that want to adopt so that they understand what adoption is like through foster care. So if you're with a tribal agency, although we do need adoptive homes, if you're for a tribal child welfare program, it's adoptive homes for kids that have been in foster care. So that's quite different from someone who wants to adopt a newborn and get placement of a newborn and the goals adoption, that's, depending on how your agency works, that's kind of more like private adoption. So this gives you a chance to kind of explain what they're looking for and then answer questions. You're also going to have in your home study their home safety check. So in my home safety check form, I call it a home assessment. We look at a lot of different things from their smoke. Where are their smoke alarms located? Are they working? Do they have any water sources? Do they have a swimming pool, a hot tub? Where are their medicine stored? I list out every single weapon. And sometimes I have to Google how to spell them because I've never heard of them. There's just a variety of things. I even put in the home assessment, our policy for infant sleeping arrangements, because I feel like that is something that is good to go over every time. A lot of our families are willing to take care of infants. And then I also assess their pets. And I interact with every pet, so we'll talk about that too. But these are all of the things that you would see in the section of the home study, is anything to do with the safety of their home and the physical makeup of their home. Just think about it like this. You've been there, but if you're writing this, think about someone else from the outside, like a court, an attorney or another agency reading this, and they should be able to really visualize that home and what that home is like. Of course, we're going to have child welfare, criminal history, if that applies. I include plans for childcare to make sure that that's addressed. We have a lot of families that live in very rural areas. Daycare access is not really the greatest in rural Oklahoma. Like where I went to high school, there's one daycare within like a 30-mile area, and they only take kids that can walk up to the age of 3. So it's very limited, and you need to make sure that they have a plan for childcare if that's needed. You'll include their education background, the school district they live in, a summary of the references that you have checked, and then usually the conclusion of the home study is that summary and recommendation. So you're summarizing, this family is A, B, and C. They have been married for this long. They, kind of the facts, but then you're going to be recommending approval or denial. And so those are, again, just some of the categories. Your home study may have be very detailed in some of these areas and may not be. So if you see any categories that we haven't listed, if you can throw them in the chat, that would be great, just to make sure that everyone's aware of all the possible categories. And we'll go to the next slide. So I talked a little bit about the motivation and purpose. So this is really important. This is really typically what starts out your home study. You want to ask them why they're doing this. And one thing, it's to make sure that they have the right expectations about placement. If your agency may have a recruiter and then it gets passed off to a home study writer, you might be asking them for the first time. At my agency, the tribe I work at, I'm the only foster care and adoption worker at all. So I'm the recruiter, I'm the home study writer, the trainer, the reassessment writer, all of that. So it's super easy for me because I know I'm the one that talked to them from their first phone call. I approve them all the way to placement. So I'm always with them. But at your agency, you might, as a home study writer, have to address those expectations about placement. They may tell you, well, the reason I want to adopt a baby, and you just want to make sure that they were explained what that looks like for your tribe. Often babies are not available for adoption. The goal is typically reunification. Not that doesn't happen, but just so that they have the proper expectations. Also, for your kinship homes, you really need to think about asking these questions too. They might have their own perspectives about it. It might seem obvious that I'm the aunt, so of course I'm going to take care of my niece who's in foster care, but they may have a unique perspective about it. Like she herself was in foster care and she knows what it's like, so she wants to create a good environment for her niece. And I think that's really vital information to know. And it helps really kind of paint a picture of their appropriateness and their expectations for fostering. And we'll go to the next slide. Another category we're going to cover is childhood. So this is a really important part of the home study process that should not be overlooked, because a person's childhood can really shape their life and provide insights into their perspectives on life now. These are just some of the questions that you might ask. Depending on their answer, you might need to go into a lot more detail. So what was your early childhood like? If they say it was good, you're going to ask a few more questions about that. It's like, okay, what was good about it? And they may say, well, my parents were always married, and we went to church, and we played sports, and we went camping, and that we have families like that. Another person, if you ask what was your early childhood like, may say, well, it was not good. I was in foster care, or I should have been in foster care, in my opinion. And so that's going to kind of lead you on different trails on how you do follow-up questions. But I think it's good to ask, were your parents ever separated or divorced? Because sometimes people are very tunnel vision when they tell you about their childhood. So asking more questions helps give you context into things they might not have thought to bring up to you. Did your family spend time together? What kind of activities? Who were the people that met your developmental needs? They may also have a grandma or grandpa that was really involved in their life. That's going to be great to help understand, their connection to their family. Also ask them, what were any unhappy memories? And was there ever a scary or traumatic event? And then what were your best memories? So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so family relationships are interpersonal relationships. We assess these because we want to make sure that they have the ability to develop, maintain, and sustain relationships with people. Also, we're going to examine that for safety issues, and we actually have a mock interviewing sample that we created to kind of talk about that. But also, we all have relationships that just don't go well, right? So with family, it's, it can be very, very dynamic in our relationships with our families. So you're able to look at, are they forgiving of people? Are they flexible in their relationships? Or maybe they're too dismissive of certain things. This is a really vital role. And again, like I said, for safety issues, they may have a brother or sister that is a active drug user, and they tell you, yeah, well, they come over every night and we eat dinner together. Well, that could be a safety risk, because an active drug user, what is their functioning like? Like, who are the people they're hanging around with? Like, when they're coming over, is it because they're homeless? Are they going to be staying the night with you? So those things we need to look at. And so just asking the question can help open up those answers. And so our next slide, I think this is where we have we have a scenario here that we're going to play about a family relationship. So we'll go ahead and hit play. Okay, Esther. So I thank you so much for sharing about your mother and kind of her background. So looking back on our last interview, you talked about how your biological children currently ride the bus to your mother's home after school. Is that correct?
Yeah, most days, except when they have practice.
So, and that's for about an hour and a half until you get home from work, right?
Yeah, it's usually about an hour and a half. Yeah, just long enough to have a snack, and she helps them with their homework.
So one thing that we just talked about with your mom was her prescription drug abuse that she has experienced for really the majority of her life. And so I just wanted to see that kind of what's going on, because you mentioned y'all do have a strained relationship. So what does that look like? How did you come to her helping you care for the kids? Can you just tell me more about this?
Well, that she's doing better, and she promised she wouldn't use before the kids got there. She'd wait till they went home, and she's their grandmother. Just because I have a bad relationship with her doesn't mean that their relationship has to be bad. And I think they know what to look for if Grammy is acting weird or falling asleep. They know to call me, and we talked about it. I just feel that's their grandmother. And she's trying to make up for things she did, when I was growing up, and trying to help out is something she can do to try to make up for it, I guess. And I think my kids are safe.
So you said that it has happened before where you've had to talk with them about her demeanor or behavior. So she has sometimes been sleepy or fallen asleep while watching them.
No, I just tell them that that's what to look for if that happens. And I just want to be honest with my kids so that they can protect themselves, and they'll call me. They'll let me know if anything like that is happening. They'll call me. I was
So
trying to educate them.
what medication is it that
You were muted, Kendra. You're still muted, Kendra.
Sorry about that. Okay. So we played a part of that video, just kind of assessing a family relationship. You will be able to access that through the links that have been provided. But as far as that goes, there are going to be times that you find out something that's kind of concerning. And so you have to address that. I'll give an example. I was working with a new foster home applicant, really great couple, seemed to have good family support. But when I asked her about her childhood, she told me that her grandfather had molested her. So I asked, I was like, okay, so what, what happened? She's like, well, nothing. My parents didn't do anything about it. She's like, I told them. And she said it never happened again. I wasn't left over there alone, but we still saw him. So that's concerning. And she actually did want to use her parents as alternate caregivers. And we decided to deny them just based off of that. They really, in our opinion, didn't protect her from her abuser. They didn't deny it. They just kind of just went along with life. And so the foster parent applicant, she understood that, and her grandfather wasn't around anymore. So we didn't have to, worry about that aspect. But asking these questions about your childhood and your family relationships, it right there, you can identify those safety issues that you want to intervene in and stop from occurring. So also our intimate relationships. So you're going to ask them about their marriage, or if they're in a long-term relationship together. You want to assess that for stability and safety. So some of the questions you might ask are, what are the strongest parts of your relationship, and what struggles do you currently have? Sometimes people don't really have a lot of struggles. So it's good to ask, okay, well, what struggles have you faced in the past, and how did you overcome those? There sometimes people give me TMI. Like someone told me that he was like to be more intimate than his wife did, and I was like, okay, I'm not a sex therapist, but so that was kind of funny because I didn't really think that would be something someone would bring up as a struggle to a home study provider, but I did appreciate the honesty. You also want to talk about what's the worst argument you ever had and how is it resolved. And sometimes I will tell you what, it's always about family, like somebody's mother-in-law or like a sister-in-law, something like that, or a father-in-law. But I did approve a family recently, and the worst argument they've ever had, they've been together several years. When they were planning their wedding, she said she wanted to have a classy wedding, and he said, but we're not classy. And she is still mad about it. So it was a really funny conversation, but then I said, okay, how did you work that out? Like, what did you talk about? And so he explained, he didn't mean she wasn't classy. He was just saying they're more of simple people, and he kind of thought classy meant like an expensive fancy wedding. So sometimes those responses can be kind of comical. Also, how do you make decisions as a couple? Who has what role, and what are their shared interests, hobbies, and activities? You want to see how do they spend their time together, and if they do, how do they do that? And so you may have a single foster parent or adoptive parent applicant. So ask them about their social life. What do you spend your time doing? What is your dating life like? Do you date on apps? Do you not date at all? Are you seeing anyone right now? And then you want to get the information for the person they're dating. Although I have had foster parents who've had a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and they didn't live in the home. They're not being approved as a foster parent with them. But if they're staying there, in our policy, 30 calendar days out of the year, we have to fingerprint them. Maybe they don't say that at all, so look at your agency's policy, but you're definitely going to want to background check people. I just kind of make it a standard of, I typically just say, would you submit to fingerprinting, even if they don't plan on staying there 30 days, just to have that extra safeguard of all of that. And I do, I'm not sure if we're going to get to cover it much in here, but online record checks, like public records, Oklahoma has a couple of good websites. And so I search those in any state they've lived in the past 5 years. And I've had to tell foster parents a couple of times, like, hey, it's like, there was a protective order that was filed against him, 20 years ago, and I'm going to get a copy of that and kind of address those things too. And just because someone has something like that on their record doesn't mean they'll be denied, but those things have to be explored. And not all foster parents know the online sleuthing to look up information about people. But then we all have those foster parents who they will tell you everything about everything before you even know about your other clients. Okay, next slide. Also, the children of applicants. I talked about this a little bit already, but you want to examine their relationships with their children. So not only are you going to talk to their children, you're going to ask them about their children too. Say, what are your child's strengths and skills? What is their medical history? Where do they go to school? What is, do they have any criminal involvement? What do you think their thoughts are about fostering and adopting? And so when you're asking these questions, sometimes you may find out some information. So I'm going to read this example here. And then we're actually going to do a poll after, because I want to hear, like, what would you do in this situation? So Dakota has applied to become a foster parent. He is healthy, financially stable, and has experience in working with traumatized children. He appears to be an excellent person to care for children. He reported he has an 11-year-old son he does not visit. When the child was 2 years old, Dakota separated from the child's mother. He has paid child support since the separation, but has had no visitation. Dakota reported he has not sought any visitation or custody. His reasoning was because he was immature at the time and moved on with his life. So now for our poll question, we're going to launch that here in a moment. Just 1 second. Are we having an issue with the poll, guys?
So
There we go.
sorry.
Okay.
It's launched.
No problem. Okay, so after hearing that summary of Dakota, should this disqualify Dakota from being a foster parent? The fact that he does not raise his child and pays child support and all of that. We have yes, no, or maybe. And then if you can please put in the chat, like, why you answered that, we would really love to hear that. So just say, why do you think he should be disqualified or shouldn't, or, why are you kind of in the middle of not sure? Please take a second to do that while you're answering your poll. Or raise your hand and we will bring you on to chat about it. Because I would imagine that probably those of you who have been doing foster care licensing for a while probably have had this experience. Okay, so so Meg said, need to know more about why. This in and of itself is not enough to disqualify. Zach wants more information, but it is a concern. That's a great point, asking collaterals, trying to find out. So is there really more to this? Is there a reason he doesn't have that? So I would recommend getting a copy of the court order. He has child support, so there's a custody order in place. Further investigating, more information. Yeah, so a lot of people want to know the full story. Tanya said it's not a safety concern, and so that's a good point. So you don't think it's a reason to deny, and you do have parents who have given up or placed children for adoption. Dwayne, you're in the middle. I think that's probably a good place to be on this one. So maybe, so Tammy, that's a great point. There could be maybe some domestic violence in the past. So maybe the reason he's not going around is because his relationship with his ex, some things were going on, maybe on her side even. Darcy is concerned, more details. And then Tanya, great, contact the mom of the child and find out what's going on. I've done that before. So I was like, could I contact the other parent? And I was able to kind of just do a reference check. And so that was really helpful. So he's in a more mature, stable place in his life and able to care for children. Again, great point with the court records. And if he's not involved in his own son's life, what would make the worker think he would have the time for an adopted child? And I think that's a really good point is, you know, if he has the ability and he has the legal opportunity to take care of his child, why is he not doing that? So, you know, we don't know that here in this, we just kind of have the background of it. But, you know, that's a concern. It really is. You want to open your home for children you don't know, you're not related to, but you're not really doing something to have a relationship with your own child. So we need to find out more about that. Marcia said he admits he was immature, may have not been in the best headspace. So we did have 10% who said yes, they would deny, 47 who said no, and 42 that said maybe. Let's see. So I'll be honest with you. It's a tough one. I think you really have to have more of that information, but to me, this stands out as a red flag. It doesn't mean it's a red flag for his current functioning, but it's a red flag for kind of his purpose and reasoning. So thank you guys so much for sharing your opinions on that. So keep this in mind as you approve kinship and relative homes. Often the first time you interact with them is the day of placement. You do emergency background checks. On your foster home application, foster parent application, I definitely recommend having a section that says children in the home and children out of the home. And that way they're able to list, like Dakota would be able to list his child in that children out of the home section, and you can kind of ask for more information about that. Because if he had shared custody and he had visitation, he would have put that child in children in the home. Trying to think what else on this, but yeah, so this was a great conversation starter. So, you know, this is something I would recommend. Talk to your supervisor about, like, how would we handle something like this? What kind of questions should we ask? I have had twice had kinship homes that I found out one had actually been unfaithful to his wife with her best friend, the drama, and then impregnated the friend. And so he paid child support, but he never had met that child who lived like 20 minutes away. They just kept that distance. So he was the legal father on the birth certificate, paid child support, but had no relationship with that kid. I didn't find it out till after because they didn't list that kid on the application. And again, the emergency nature of doing a kinship placement, if they don't list it, you may not know it. It's the same thing for if you say, have you ever been convicted of a crime? They put no. Their emergency search you run for their name says no, but then their fingerprints come back and they had a crime. So just keep in mind as you're planning for how you're going to address these things, how will you address it in this process of the initial application, and how will you address it if you find it out during. And then, so I see a chat, during one of your home stays, you discovered that the mom was really the dad. Okay. Definitely a lot of circumstances and experience pop up with this. And I would definitely say if you're writing home stays for any amount of time, this will pop up for you. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. And I talked again about the summary and recommendations. So it's typically at the end of the home study. It's very important. You really need to have this in your home study. If you don't, you just wrote a biography. You didn't write a true home study. So this is an example of how you might assess somebody. So this is going to be a strong candidate that you're approving. Kateri has a sincere motivation to become a foster parent. She's a special education teacher trained on helping children with special needs. So I'm putting in here her career, but also that, you know, she has that experience helping kids who have special needs. She has taught foster children in her 20 years. So she has that connection there. She shows compassion for families involved in the child welfare system. So I would be putting that based on her probably in her interviews saying, you know, like, I know kids come from hard places. I, you know, want to help their parents, you know, all of that. Talk about, you know, she wants to have a relationship. So you always want to address how do they feel about bridging. And I like to include quotes whenever I can in a home study to say it from their perspective. So when you're doing your interview, to write that down, I'll just put quotes around it so I know that that's exactly what they said. So she said, I understand the importance of the parent-child relationship. I will do my part in helping a child maintain their family connections. And then you make your recommendation for approval. I will say this, you will at some point have to make recommendation for denial. People may pass the background checks and the financial and all of that. Then you get to their home study and you deny them based off things you find once you start talking with them and checking their references. I've denied a lot of homes and it's not fun because people expect once they move forward and you're in the home, they're going to be approved. So I always say, if you get approved, I don't care how confident I am. I say it's how I do it is I make a recommendation to my director. They make the final decision. So that's how I look at it. It's like, if our director approves your home study, don't ever tell people, oh, it'll be fine, because you never know what's going to come up. Also include those weaknesses and areas of concern. If you're denying the home study, if something pops up and say you've only done half of your interviewing, I have still written up everything I had and had that denial recommendation. And that was my documentation to prove if they made a complaint or, tribal leadership had a question about it. Because, sometimes our tribal applicants may call the tribal council office or the executive office, then I had that to share if they needed it. It's okay to not recommend them for approval. You have to do what you feel is safe. Next question. Or sorry, next slide. Okay, so this is my dog Ghost. He's the one in there crying. He got to model for the tribe's gift shop. So he has on the little Minot Nemosh collar. It means good dog. So wanted to kind of give him a shout out. So when you are interviewing, you have to be engaging. And so if your personality is not necessarily engaging, that's okay, but you have to kind of make that extra effort to be engaging. So each relationship you have is going to be unique because your client is going to be unique. When you're talking with them, you need to share with them your plan and your purpose for interviewing so they understand. The more they understand about the process and the reasons you're asking questions, the easier it will be for you to get responses. So ensure a comfortable setting. I talked about that before. I put it in here a second time because I mean it. Do not let your feet go to sleep because you're sitting cross-legged on a broken recliner. So make sure you're comfortable and make sure they are comfortable. You want to appear non-judgmental so that you may be told something, you're like, whoa, red flag, huge. Just listen to it and respond in the most respectful way that you can. But you do have to address hard things. Also take time to compliment the home. Tell them, be sincere first, but say, oh my gosh, you have such a big TV. That's awesome. Or I really like your couch. Make them feel comfortable. Find a way to engage with them and start building that relationship. I can always find something I love about a home or somebody's vehicle. I'm always, I always just try to take that extra time and acknowledge their pets. And I know some of you on here probably despise animals jumping on you. I let them kiss me. I don't care. They're all over me. And so you may want to let them know in advance, hey, do you mind putting your pets up? But in my home studies, I do engage with the animals, and I put that in my home assessment section that, worker spent time with the animals. Now, I was just at a home a couple of nights ago and their chickens, one of them tried to attack me and they had a turkin, which is a chicken that looks like a turkey. So sometimes those animals, you don't really need to hold if they're livestock. But having that, having that acknowledgement of their pet can make them feel special. And it's also good for you so that you can make sure that it is a safe animal to be around children. Next slide. So there's different types of questions. So the first one is closed-ended questions. These are basically yes or no, or have a specific response. What's your birthday? How long have you been married? How many kids do you have? What school district do you live in? So you're going to have questions like that. And then on the next slide, we'll talk about open-ended questions. And next slide, please. So these are broader questions. So you're going to get more information. You may obtain feelings, emotions, and perceptions, positive and negative. So in the beginning, we talked about that. Tell me about your childhood. That's an example of an open-ended question. Could go anywhere. Why do you want to be a foster home? What are your views on discipline? And also, you're gonna, when you ask questions that are open-ended, you're going to have to follow up almost all of the time to ask more questions. So you said you and your wife struggled with finances in the past. Can you tell me more about that? You said your relationship with your brother is fine. What does that mean? What does fine mean? Next slide. So also tough questions. This is inevitable when you're working with humans. There are going to be times that we have to talk about hard things that have happened in their life. So abuse and trauma may have to be addressed, and you have to assess this to make sure that they can help a child who has faced trauma. When I talk about sometimes you have to deny people in the process, I had a worker who everything was great. It was going really well. She gets to the interview with one of the applicants, and she talks about how she's dealt with a lot of depression and issues based off her mom's, like, I'd say emotionally abusive behavior towards her, her entire childhood and her adult life, and that they've been working on things. And she feels like being a foster parent would put her out there and make her kind of get back into society and out of her depression. Well, in addition to that, and a couple other things, she just was not emotionally stable, in our opinion, in our assessment. We did check a behavioral health reference as well for her therapist, and combined with some of that information, she just was not able to be approvable at that time. So we did offer resources and let her know, like, we'd like to work with in the future, but these are issues that we think could be worked on. You also have to help guide and support your interviewee if they struggle or appear uncomfortable answering, which may happen, but you have to do that so you can get the information you need. So on the next slide, I think we have a scenario here. So we're going to go ahead and play this, and then we can talk about that a little bit.
So Esther, you mentioned just now that you were abused as a child by your uncle. Could you tell me more about that?
I shouldn't have said anything. It's not something I really want to talk about. It happened in the past. I moved on, and I don't even think about it anymore. I don't know why I said that.
So I'm happy you moved on. That's really a good thing to hear. But and I also understand you not really wanting to talk about that. But as we talked about when we first started this interviewing process, we would bring up some things that may be difficult to talk about or uncomfortable. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that, and I understand if it would have anything to do with me being a foster parent, but it doesn't. I'm not going to foster children who are sexually abused anyway.
So I know we mentioned this briefly, but this is kind of our time to get to talk more about this topic. Is I know you have your preferences on the type of children that you would like to take placement of, but it is possible that a child in your home could have been sexually abused. Sometimes that information is discovered after they're in your home. So maybe in the beginning we knew the reason for the child being placed in care was domestic violence, but we found out later there was sexual abuse. Sometimes the child even tells you that. So you're the one to find that out because they begin to feel comfortable with you as their foster parent. So the reason I ask this is I have to make sure that you have dealt with your own history in order to prepare you to take care of children and handle these kind of situations. I also want to make sure that I can provide you any tools or resources you need to address any triggers that could pop up in this situation.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I guess we could. I don't mind talking about it with you right now. So, what other questions do you have?
Okay, so that was the example of kind of someone that was hesitant to answer a question that was more tough for them. And so taking that time to explain to them, and of course, again, you'll be face to face, so it won't be like Zoom to Zoom. But just showing them compassion and being patient with them to help them understand is going to be really important. So our next slide, I think we have an example of kind of getting that information and kind of going through learning more about that situation. So we'll go ahead and play that now as well.
So Esther, you did just mention to me that you were abused as a child by your uncle. Could you please tell me more about that?
Yeah, yeah. When I was about 15 years old, my uncle Andy was visiting during Christmas, and I went to sleep early. And when I was excited for Santa, and when I woke up, he was touching me inside my pajama pants. I asked him what he was doing, and he left the room. I told my mom the next morning, um, and my family kicked him out of the house.
I'm so sorry to hear that happened to you. So after he was made to leave, did your family make a report to the police?
Yeah, I remember the police being there. They took a report, but they said they couldn't charge him since there wasn't any evidence. My family told him that he could never be around me or the house ever again.
Well, I'm glad your family took those steps to help protect you. Did he stay away?
Yes, yeah, I've only seen him once at a family funeral, and I stayed away from him.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that. So, now you're a little bit older, a lot of years have passed, but incidents like this can still have an impact on you. So, how have you coped with that back then and also now?
Well, then my mom, she talked me into seeing a therapist at the tribe. I really didn't want to, but I went for about 3 months. And she really did help me process the things I was feeling and my emotions. And I just felt, it felt good just being able to talk to somebody about everything.
So, now that you are older and you're an adult, how do you feel that this situation has impacted you?
I had some trust issues around men, but I've worked through them. Um, and I know that not every man is bad. My husband is aware of my background, and he's always been really understanding. If I ever want to talk about it, he's there.
So, have you thought about potentially taking care of a child who has been sexually abused? That could be something that is revealed to you after you receive placement. So, we don't necessarily know that always in the beginning of a case. So, what are your thoughts about taking care of a child that has maybe dealt with something similar?
I think I could be really understanding, and I would know how to, because I know what they went through, because it happened to me that one time with my uncle. But I think I would be able to give them support and listen to them. Um, my family listened to me, so I know how good that was to be supported and listened to.
Do you feel comfortable reaching out for help if you felt like you needed to talk to somebody or needed some extra tools?
Yeah, yeah. I like to read things first. So like if I could get pamphlets or whatever first, um, and then if I had questions, be able to have somebody to call, that would work best for me.
Okay, great. Our agency definitely likes to make sure that our foster parents have all of their needs met, not just beds for the kids, but also things that you need emotionally. So if you find yourself in a situation to where you just want to talk, or maybe you feel like some professional help could be beneficial, we can help you with that.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, I went to that therapist and found it helpful. So I would do that again.
Great. So Esther, you mentioned just now that you were.
So I think that was a good example of we're not going to know about that unless your application happens to ask a question about, have you ever been a victim of sexual abuse or domestic violence, which it may. You're going to show up there and kind of hear this. So you have to be prepared to be able to talk about this. And sometimes it's a lot more, I should say, more serious, less serious. It kind of depends on the situation as far as like how they feel about it. So I asked her, can you tell me more about it? And then you have to find out, okay, let's look at the safety part of this. Like, was this ever reported? If it was, what was that like? Was there court involvement? And then you definitely have to bring up, you may take placement of a child who has experienced this as well. You might not find out till after they're in your home. How are you going to handle that? Like, how can I help you through that? And so it might be good to go ahead and give them resources during the process. And you can include that in your summary and recommendation of, they have experienced A, B, and C in their past, and they're willing to reach out and get help. They're willing to ask us for help. And I provided these resources so they have them readily available should a crisis pop up or a trigger pop up. Next slide.
Or abuse of the child by your uncle. Could you tell me more?
So this one can kind of be funny. So redirection, you have to use it. It's just kind of the fact of the matter, because you may ask a question and they are telling you something you don't really need to know, or maybe they misunderstood your question. Then try to think about, how are you going to redirect that conversation. So you may just want to summarize what they've said. Like, I loved hearing about your tractor. That was really interesting information. Now let's talk about your health history. So you're kind of building a transition with that. And then sometimes people realize, oh, I'm so sorry, I talked too much. And I'm like, that's fine. I love getting to know you. And it's really good information for me to know as, we have this relationship. And then another example, now that we've discussed your relationship with your stepfather, we're going to talk about your relationship with your siblings. So maybe they were telling you just a lot more than you needed to know about their stepfather. It's like, yeah, well, then when he was in the military, he won this award. And then he went overseas to here and there. And it's just, again, it's fine information, but you just kind of need to carry on with your interview. You're going to have to think about your redirection skills and just, of course, be as respectful as you can. We don't want to offend anyone. Don't make them think that you don't want to hear what they have to say, because that's going to close them back off. So just use your redirection skills to make them feel comfortable to carry forward. And then, so we have a comment I see. So in the interview, she at first said that she hadn't thought about it, but then she brought it up. So it must have been something bothering her, maybe subconsciously. And that's a great point, because if you never asked, you wouldn't know. She might not be, that might be something that they do want to talk about. Maybe they do want some help, but if you're not asking, has this ever happened to you, or what was your childhood like, then you're not going to have that opportunity to have that discussion. So we can go to the next slide. So confrontation. This is another thing that is inevitable and necessary if your interviewee is being resistant. Maybe they are not answering questions or not being honest. You're going to have to confront them. So you might say this, you appeared to be irritated when I asked you about your relationship with your ex-wife. Is there a reason for this? So pick up on those cues. Make sure that you understand that sometimes people's attitude, the way they answer a question, it's a lot of there's a lot of unspoken information behind there.
Kendra, I just wanted to backtrack just for a little bit.
Yes.
There's a question in the chat. If the applicant says that traumatic situations in their childhood doesn't affect them now, do you place that in the confidential section of the home study as a concern?
Potentially, and it depends how your home study is written. So, you may not have a confidential section to put your concerns. It may be something that they would be able to read as well. But yeah, I mean, you have to kind of factor that in of, they're not concerned about it, but I had this discussion with them. I made this plan with them. They understand they can contact me. Because it's not necessarily someone being dismissive in many instances. They truly have moved on. They maybe have had therapy or had, contact with within their religion, or they just feel like this was 40 years ago and I am so happy in a different place in my life. So it's not necessarily a concern, but if it is a concern, just try to think about, are you listing it as a concern, but you're still approving them? And then what do you release to the courts? Because if they end up adopting and you have to turn that home study in, you just always want to show, if there's a concern, how you addressed it. Like I mentioned, the concern with the grandpa, or I guess I should say the foster mom's parents who did not protect the kids. I listed that in the home study. They were aware that if it's a concern, they should know.
I just just to joke, I would be concerned that she still believed in Santa when she was 15 and thinking we should have probably scripted those out instead of doing them on the on the fly. Funny.
Yeah. So, there's going to be things that pop up. And so I have a quote here. It's kind of small, but it says, "There is no shame in not knowing. The shame lies in not finding out." So please take a picture of that. Remember that as you write home studies. It is your responsibility. You are the one that your tribe or agency has selected and is paying to make sure that these kids are going to have safe homes. Not only safe homes, but stable homes. And I take home studies very seriously. It's something that so when I started in my career, it was something that was not a really defined process, I should say, at the tribe I worked at, but over time we worked on it. We kind of moved along with the times, because a lot of tribal child welfare programs maybe haven't been around for very long as far as their foster care licensing. And so just look at, maybe right now you feel like what you have is pretty basic. It meets maybe the tribal state agreement requirements that you have. Maybe it meets your minimum tribal standards, but what can we do to push this process forward? How can we better train our staff? I recommend, if you're a supervisor, you need to be going in the field with your workers, regardless of if they've been doing it for 4 or 5 years, because you need to check and make sure they're not being dismissive. They're not missing things that maybe they shouldn't be missing. It's really important to keep that trained. Now, I will say this, I've spent a career of being understaffed, overworked, all of that. But if you can't make it out in the field, when you read those home studies, it's okay to give feedback. I usually add comments on the side, and then I make sure if there's grammar issues even that I put those on there, and I'm like, hey, just next time, remember, we're going to word things this way. But it is your responsibility as the person writing them and doing the interviews, and as the person that maybe is the approver of them that's not going out in the field. You guys are working together to make sure that all these questions are answered. So often, like I said, right now I'm the only home study person. But at my previous tribe I worked at, I had several staff, and I probably never read a home study I didn't have at least 5 questions about. It's like, okay, can you tell me more about this? Sometimes the worker could answer it. Other times they had to go back. I'm like, okay, I need you to ask them more. So they would call the foster parent applicant and say, hey, could you tell me more about this situation? And so you really have to have a keen eye about this, and remember that other people may read this home study. And so you want to be proud of that. I feel proud that I have very detailed home studies that I feel like address everything they need to address. Now, I could probably add a lot more to it, but I feel pretty confident in how my home studies are now. This is another example of confrontation. You are not wanting to discuss the reason you attended mental health counseling last year. I want to respect your feelings, but I also need more information about this to assess your application. I'll also need to complete a reference with your therapist as required by our tribal policy. And so if you do check mental health references, I would recommend putting that on your application as, have you ever been in therapy? Are you currently in therapy now? So that you can start getting that information at the beginning of the process. And there's really pros and cons to when you check references. It's really helpful to do it before you go out to their home. Other times it's more effective to do them after you've already met the family, because then you can kind of pick up on some different cues or ask extra questions. Again, I could probably talk about references for 100 years. Okay, I see a question or see a comment. You would document as a concern and bring to court attention for clarification or further recommendations, especially with words of the court. Okay. And then what were some mistakes you made that you learned from being new at licensing? Everything. I've literally made every mistake ever, which is how I've gotten to where I am now. Like I said, there wasn't really a great training process at the time when I started, just because everything was still developing. And so when I first started in home studies, I literally sit at their house for 3 or 4 hours at one time and did their home study. I went to their home one time and approved them as a home, and that was it. And I looked at it, I used to call it a biography, and I don't feel like I was really assessing that great in the beginning. But over time, it's really a skill that you develop. But I would say, don't be dismissive. That's probably the easiest thing to do when you're new at it, is dismissing things in the home assessment, in their interviews. You want to make sure that you are just, like I said, it's really vital. You are a crucial person in the safety of children and the protection of children. So I'm sure that everyone in here that completes home studies can look back and say, man, I should have done that differently. Okay, we can go to the next slide now. So this is another example of confrontation. So we will show that now.
Okay, Esther, now we're going to talk about your early childhood. And so I wanted to first ask you some questions about that. So what was your early childhood like for you?
Jeez, that was so long ago. It was fine. It was a fine childhood.
Okay, so where did you grow up?
I grew up right here.
Okay. Did you spend your entire childhood living here?
Yeah, we go up to visit my grandmother, where she's from. But mostly, yeah, spent my whole childhood here.
Okay. So were your parents ever separated or divorced throughout your childhood?
No, no. Why do you need to know that anyway? I don't understand what that why that matters.
Yeah, so like when I first scheduled our visit and talked about, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions about yourself that may not seem like that big of a deal, or you're maybe wonder why would they need to know that. But the home study is really an assessment of really everything about your life. And so I'm looking at your relationships with your relatives to assure that everything is safe. If there have been any issues, that we're able to see that you've moved on from those or can cope with those. And so there's going to be a lot of questions about things, like I said, that may seem small, but it'll help us in the big picture.
Well, you must know everything already, since this is my nephew that I want to take. They must have told you everything already. I don't know why we would have to talk about anything.
Yeah,
He's my nephew.
Yeah, absolutely understand that. And so as a relative foster parent, you actually are going through the same process as any foster parent would. And so what I'm asking you, it's pretty common across really most agencies.
Why? I'm not really a regular foster parent. I wouldn't take just any kid. I'm only doing this because that's my nephew.
Yeah,
So I don't know why. I don't know why I would have to go through the same thing that everybody else has to do. It's not the same situation.
Yeah, and I definitely understand where you're coming from with that. And really, the reason we do this, it's because of our policy, of course. But like I said, we want to ensure safety. And so, like me asking you about your relationship with your parents in your childhood, I'm trying to see if maybe there was anything that happened that really wasn't good. Maybe if there's some of those relationships now that we need to examine further. So that's what I'm looking for.
I'm 63 years old. Do you think I remember? No, everything was no, it was fine. I don't know what it would matter anyway.
I know
I
it
don't know
can
why
be
we
hard
even
to,
have to talk about it.
yeah, it can be hard to
I know you
remember.
explained, but I don't understand.
Okay, it can be hard to remember some things. Even I have difficulty sometimes trying to recall things for my childhood too. But just know that just answer to the best of your ability, and then you will get to see a copy of your home study, and we'll go over it together to make sure that we didn't miss anything and that everything is represented the way that it should be.
Now, what would happen if I said no? I just really don't want to talk about it. What would happen if I refused to do this, to answer these questions that I don't think have anything to do with me taking care of my nephew right now?
Well, that's something that, I could speak with my supervisor about, but I've done this a long time and I know that these are requirements that we have. And so I want to make this as easy as I can on you as possible. So what would make you feel better about sharing this information?
I don't know. I don't. I don't see why I have to be treated like every other foster parent. You know the situation, you know how important this is. That's my nephew. I don't know why anything that happened to me when I was a kid so long ago that I can't even remember has anything to do with this. And I just feel like you're just trying to waste time.
Sure, I understand that you're pretty upset and you don't want to share this information. Like I said, what I can do is go back and talk to my supervisor. I will have to come back out. We do have to talk about these things, but let's try to figure out a way that we can do it where you feel comfortable. And maybe I can get some information to give you a better understanding of why this information is needed. Because I think possibly we could get a better explanation for you.
Yeah, I can't do anything today or tomorrow. It would have to be in a couple days. But
Okay,
yeah, I'll talk to you again.
okay, great. As always, I will schedule our home visit around your availability. I work evenings, I work weekends, and we can make that work for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I see a great question about this in the chat. So do you ever come across applicants in real life who feel interrogated? And is there another approach they can feel comfortable? I mean, yes, that's the simple fact of it. But your biggest defense on that is before you go to their home, tell them everything you're going to ask them. You can even give them a copy of your like home study questionnaire, or maybe just kind of give them an example. Because if you just show up at their house, they're just thinking you're just going to walk through and everything's going to be good. They need to know what they're taking part in. They need to know what a home study is. I usually tell them, like, I have a 24-page questionnaire. I know it sounds like a lot, but really, I'm just asking you about your life. You're the expert in your life, and I just want to learn more about that. And so if you feel like you're asking a lot of questions and they're kind of like, change this up, maybe take a break. You have, several times that you go out to their house, you might think, okay, I might ask this question next time. They seem a little bit kind of about it. And we're really going to see that more with our kinship homes, because most people that you're approving as foster and adoptive, they're like very excited and like very joyful in answering questions and in going through this process. So when you deal with relatives, they have everything in the world on their plate. So we have to be really respectful of that. Next slide.
So Esther, you did just mention to me that
for time's sake, do we want to move on to concluding the home study process?
Yes, ma'am.
you were abused as a child by your uncle.
So as we wrap up the home study process, I think I mentioned this before, but you want to have a process of how you do your home studies. My families get to review the home study after approval. So I give it to my boss, and once she approves, they get to review it. Now, I do leave off a few things which are pretty standard in Oklahoma, which would be their references. They do not get to see a summary. And in your home study, you may summarize every single question you ask them, or you might just do a few quotes from each one and say overall they are positive. So that depends on what it looks like, but they don't get to see that. They don't see the summary of the criminal history or the interviews with their children, if that applies. So they get to see everything else. And I tell them that in their individual interviews, that just a reminder, your spouse is going to get to read what you tell me, what I write, but we're interviewing so we can have that one-on-one time. So think about if you have a home study, like, what are you comfortable with the family reading? Do you want them, mine sign off on their home study. So they have not, it's not just me, they approve it as well. It gives a chance to update. They may tell you the wrong age, or you may write down the wrong information. So it's a chance to make it more accurate. And then again, remember this, over time, a variety of people may look at this home study. You may even, maybe you're filing for a case transfer in tribal court. Now, should the state judge question placement after a transfer? Not necessarily, but will they? Possibly. And so you just think about, if, I'm needing to show that this family is appropriate, do I have the information within this Is this a good quality to provide to a court? Is this acceptable for an adoption? Again, you may duly certify a home with another agency and have to provide that to the agency. So just think about, is all of this releasable information? And is this a quality that would be helpful to another agency or a court? Okay, next slide. I think that might be the last one. So that's kind of again, this was the basics and beyond. So this is really scratches the surface of a topic that is very deep and we could talk about forever. So I want to say Miigwech, Chiguyen, thank you so much for your questions and participation. I hope that you are able to use some of the information sent out to you, watch the video links to see kind of longer versions of these mock interviews. And if you have questions, my email, it's kendraloudon@gmail.com, pretty easy. And again, I was going to say Miigwech for that. And are there any questions before we conclude today? Again, please feel free to raise your hand so we can bring you on mic. Miigwech for your compliments.
Yeah, Laura will send an email to all the attendees today that will include a tribal home study guide that has all of this information, plus links to the videos, the full videos, and more resources. So, and please fill out, she'll also ask you to fill out a evaluation. So please do that too. Thank you, everyone.